Hey, how's it going, everybody? Today I'm going to be going over the trimmers pane down here. This is going to be part 2 of the lower section of the Diva, the lower pane of the Diva. We're going to be going over the trimmers, and I'm going to throw in the scope on this video as well, because my last video is going to be about the modifications page, and I feel like that's going to take a little while longer than the trimmers, so I'm going to kind of put these two together. So we're going to go over everything on here, all the voice options and everything, and we're going to go through how to use a scope real quick, because that's pretty simple and straightforward. And just a quick plug, I've got several really awesome high quality preset packs on my website, which is the link right down below this video. So please make sure to check it out. I appreciate you listening to that plug real quick. Now let's get back to the video. Now, in some ways, this relates back to all these pages relate to each other. So some of things relate back to the main page that I covered in video 1. So if you catch yourself lost on something, please make sure to watch part 1. Then you can really see some stuff on regarding here, like we're going to be talking about voices and stacks, and that's where I cover the voices and stacks really in depth. For example, like polyphony is in the main video 1. So let's go back to the trimmers page. Let's talk about the voices real quick. The way that this works is you see right here these rows. Okay, these are 8 voices, and actually you see how each one of them has there's one dot. Let me put it back in poly briefly. There's one dot. So there's each one of them has 2 dots. So you got 8 voices with 2 dots. So real briefly, I'm just going to switch my voices here to 8 so you can see all of them. And then when you go through poly, it's going to go through each of the voices kind of randomly like this. Or it goes in some order, but when I start playing chords, so he starts randomly kind of selecting them. Now you'll notice every time I hit a note, it's only lighting up the first dot, okay? And the reason for that is this represents 8 voices. Each one of these rows represents one voice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? And so when we have 8 voices here, you're going through the first dot of each of these 8. But the question is, our polyphony goes up to 16. So how do we have 16 voices? Well, each one of these voices is, you have 8 settings for 8 voices, but you got 2 lights under each voice. So when you put your polyphony up higher than 8, let's say 12, 16, and so forth, you basically, when both of these light up, it means that it's using the same settings from this voice twice. Okay, so you have like 2 sets of identical 8, but when they're kind of randomly chosen around, you don't get any weird doubling or anything like that. That's how this is actually set up. So you see normally, yeah, some of them are doubled, like right here. So right now, it's playing one of these, and it's playing a duplicate of whatever setting this is. All right, so that's how it works. So when you total these up, you get 16. So each one of these is a voice, and a voice is related to polyphony, meaning like, you know, when I went through this in the main, is like when you have only 2 voices right here, and you play this, you're always working with only 2. So I can't even play a 3-note chord. I only get 2 notes. Okay, and when you go here and you switch to mono, like this, you only get 1 voice. All right, so that's kind of how that works. I hope you understand that, and that's clear. Like if I went to 4, it would grab these 4. Oh, because I'm in mono. Let's go to poly. So that's how it works, and each voice is a key. Okay, if you need to really know more about that, just look up analog synthesizer polyphony voices, like, why is the Prophet 5 called the Prophet 5? It's got 5 voices, and how that works. Then you can kind of get more into the technical details, but hopefully that kind of shows how that works. Okay, so now you understand how these actual voices work. And I'm going to tell you right now that each one of these knobs is settings for each voice. Like each note you play, there's 3 settings, 3 settings, 3 settings. Okay, so when you have like a VCO analog synthesizer, by having each voice be a little bit different, by the way, these are tuning settings, just so you know, like fine tuning. They're fine tuned a little bit differently and they kind of drift around. That's how you get these fat VCO sounds. So let's actually go into the tuning right now. The way that this tuning works is like this. You see how this 3 knobs here, okay? Each one of these potential oscillators in our models have up to 3 oscillators. So triple VCO has 3 oscillators. Dual VCO has 2 oscillators. DCO has 1 oscillator, really. And dual VCO eco has 2. And digital has 2. Okay, so the way that this works is each one of these knobs corresponds to fine tuning of an oscillator. So when you have only 1 oscillator, then you're only working with the top row. When you have 2 oscillators, you're working with 2 rows. And when you have 3 oscillators, you're working with 3 rows. So like, for example, let's go to, I'll show you right now how exactly this works. Let's go to mono mode. So we're only working with 1 voice right now. Okay. And when you turn up the first oscillator, let me open the cutoff here. There's F sharp. And I want to show you how these controls work in accordance with this Detune Amt. Okay, and this Detune Amt makes it so you don't have to play around with fine-tuning all these settings constantly. Okay, that as long as they're kind of just knocked out in position, left and right and center, and they're kind of balanced, so they're not all like too much to the right or too much to the left, then all you really need is this Detune Amt, and that gives you most of the functionality you need, unless you want some very specific kind of trick per voice and you really know what you're doing there. And that's very rare that you would do that. But it's possible. So basically the way this works is right now, you can see that the top one, you see at the top here, it's 0. You see at the top there, it's 44.6 to the right. And there it's negative 50. So I have 1 straight down the middle, 1 tuned sharp, and 1 tuned flat for each of these oscillators. So when I play 1, there's a tuner. That's right on point. Now let's turn up the second one. Right on point. Let's turn up the third one. Right on point. All right. So why did these not change? Because the way this works is it's corresponding to this Detune Amt. So right now the Detune Amt is at 0. So if you want to have these work, the more you turn up the Detune Amt, the more that these change from being slight pitch variations per voice into something more chaotic, into like really drastic pitch variations per voice. Like your synth tuning is all knocked out on each voice and uncalibrated. Okay, and an ideal analog synthesizer with VCOs, you want to have something a little bit in the middle. And the little trick is with DCOs, like digitally controlled oscillators, typically you want this at 0 because you want all of these voices to be straight down the middle because they're digitally tuned. Okay, and like a Juno or a DCO or a digital oscillator, okay, you turn all this Detune Amt all the way down to like not get any VCO analog emulation. All right. But when you turn this up, you're going to see what I'm saying. So let's turn this up just a little bit. And now we go back and we play oscillator 1. which is right down the middle. But that's because this is tuned 0. But let's now play oscillator 2. See, it's a little sharp. And let's play oscillator 3. It's a little flat. Now watch what happens when I turn this detune amount to a stronger value. Let's play oscillator 1. It's exactly at 0 here. So it's still on point. Let's play oscillator 2. Really sharp. Play oscillator 3. Whoops, just 1. Really flat. Now watch what happens if I do it here. You see that? But if I turn this detune amount down, you see that? So basically, that's why when you have these, like, as long as they're kind of all knocked out of position in a balanced way, you just play with this detune amount for any typical, like, synth setting. You don't have to go in and do the voices every time you make a patch. That would be a huge pain. So this is really great to do it that way. All right. So that's how that works. And now I'm in mono. So let's kind of knock it back to poly. And we'll go to 8 voices. And let's turn this down like this. And let's just turn up oscillator 2. And we'll see this. Watch. You see how each one of these is knocked out correspondingly? So I'll just play this for you real quick. Oh, let's turn this up a little bit so we can see the effect. Voice 2, sharp, sharp. Voice 3, a little sharp. Voice 4, a little sharp. 5, again sharp. 6, sharp. 7, normal. 8, sharp. 1, flat. So most of these tend to be sharp, but you can see at the third one, most of them tend to be flat. So it's kind of like, as long as you have that balance and you're kind of usually using this at a lower level, not so extreme, it's okay. If you start seeing these like too out of balance, or like you make your own templates and so forth, you kind of want to play around with that. So it's not always just too sharp or something like that. You just kind of want it in the middle overall on an average. So you see how that works? So when you're playing chords, it's like, see how that works? Okay, so like it knocks it out. And by combining it with all these oscillators, basically you get that analog sound. And again, if you want that DCO, like the digital tuning, you just turn this down. Like the Juno doesn't have beating. Like when you detune oscillators, they beat against each other like this. But like if you have a digital oscillator that's perfectly tuned, you play octaves, you get no beating. So that's more like a Juno. So that's a little tip if you're gonna, it's kind of like, I did some Juno presets, that's in my link down below. Right? And actually what I did there is like I went and put all these to 0 instead of doing it this way, because back then I kind of didn't really research this as in depth, but it was the same effect, because when these are all to 0, this knob isn't going to make any difference, because you want to have, when it's digital, everything is knocked straight down the middle. So there's kind of a little bit of an error when you're like dealing with the templates and Diva that are built in with like the Juno. That's one of the errors. There's a couple little other tricks that I use here, but you don't want drift and you don't want them detuned out, because you're emulating VCOs on a DCO oscillator. It's not as authentic of a sound, unless you want to have a DCO with drift or detuning. That's up to you. Now, I talked about drift. Let's go to, I think that kind of explains all of these, the lights down here, the tunings and the detune amount, and how that corresponds with the number of voices. Let's go real quick to drift, because I just brought that up. Okay, drift is just like an analog drift, like this. Like, let me bring up oscillator 1. Let me turn up the drift. Look at how balanced it is here. See, that like makes it all floaty. That's kind of the maximum drift on the Diva. I've seen other analog synth emulations that have even more drift. I've owned a couple analog synths, and from the ones I've owned and played with, typically, to be honest with you, maybe something even up here is pretty good. Okay, this is like really like some of the more vintage style models that I've had. They tend to drift around a little bit, although some also are more stable, and you get something more like that. So it really depends on what you're emulating and how much stability you want. Okay, keep in mind that'll affect your phasing when you're doing chords and things like that. Now, that's basically all that the drift does, and it just applies that to every oscillator. So now we'll go real quick to the voice map modulator. And what this does is it doesn't actually have any direct effect on its own, but it allows you to apply another effect per voice. And again, you get 8. So if you're going to use the same voice twice, you're duplicating it like this row. And you apply an effect per voice. Like let's say, now this is kind of like unusual. It's one of those things that you don't often use. Especially if you're just emulating analog synthesizers, you're not really going to get these kind of effects in analog synthesizers. But if you want some, and this is very specific because over here you can kind of randomize things like cutoff and so forth, and I'll show you what's going on with that. But if you want something very specific per voice, this is where this voice map modulator comes in. Okay, like let's say I want to do some panning per voice. So like this is going to be panned left and this one will be panned right. And for ease of use, we'll go to polyphony. So we only use 2 voices. Now, right now, you're not hearing anything because again, by themselves, these do nothing. They're assigned. And like when you go to pan mod, for example, here, let's bring this back in the middle. You go to pan mod and you go to voice map. Let's put this to 0. We're not getting any panning effects. Let me just show you the channel here. Not getting any panning effects. But if I do this and I turn up like this, basically this panning is now affecting this voice map. They're modulating each other. So one is right, one is left. Watch this. See that? One is left, one is right. Depending on which one lights up. All right. So that's how that works. And you can use that for other things too. Like if you want like for example, a different, like a very specific different cutoff for each voice. Let's say I put a voice map here, a voice map modulation, and I kind of put this down in the middle with some resonance. That's pretty extreme. Can you hear that? Watch. One is low, one is high. See, now I'm modulating it high, and let's say I want to modulate this one low. That's how that works, just so you know. All right, that's what those voice map modulators do. Okay, so we went over basically this whole entire section here. Now we're just going to go to the variance. Let's go to the right here. Basically, the way that the variance works is it's a lot like this sort of detune amount. Okay, but it works, it's like per voice. Okay, but instead of just working for pitch and tuning, it does it for each and every thing for like cutoff, envelope amount, pulse width, and so forth. Okay, glide. And it goes again per voice. So like let's go to 4 voices and I'll show you real quick by doing like something with a cutoff. It's a little bit funky how this works. So let's do self-resonation. We're going to go to tuning right here. First, you want to press the randomize button. when you're setting these. It's kind of funny, but I don't know why they set it up that way. But you should press the randomize button. What this does is it basically like randomizes these parameters just like this for each voice. So now this will have its proper effect. So like watch this. See how this cycles through the voices? But it's stable. Now as you turn this up more and more, see that? Now if you randomize it again, it's going to change all those values. See, that's way different. Okay, so like you press the randomize and then you go to something like this, like cutoff, and then you get that variance. Okay, so you press randomize and then you kind of set them like this a little bit to where you want them. Okay, and that's just kind of right there usually. This is pretty typical, and just leave it there. Okay, and this is kind of built into the templates already. So that's that. And that's how the variance works. And then let's go back here. Now let's go into the last thing, like the LED color. This is like almost nothing. It just changes the color of the LEDs all over your synth. That's just for aesthetics. Now let's go here, reset phase 1, 2, 3 in transient mode. So basically the way this works is like when you go to the reset phase only works on Osc reset. Otherwise it does absolutely nothing. All right. We go to analog. This is the regular analog transient mode. And what that means is like just everything works as an analog synthesizer. When you press the keys, you know, the oscillator is always running in the background and it opens the gate. Okay, so like you always have a different phase. Like even right now in an analog synth, the oscillator is running in the background. So when you press a key, it doesn't actually start the oscillator. It just opens the gate so you hear it. So when you have like oscillator phasing, like the two oscillators are in different phases and so forth, they're not exactly lined up and it creates like a moving natural effect. Just research oscillator phase and reset phase versus analog, because I don't want to get into a huge technical discussion on this. This is more about specific on the Diva. So when you have analog, that's regular. And basically, DC reset is a very minor change of anything. The only reason you would ever use that really is like there's something called DC offset, which is like sometimes when you use a very fast attack time and you have certain envelopes, when you press a key, you'll hear a little thump or click like at the start of the attack time. And that's something caused by DC offset. It's like a distortion in the analog circuit. So if you want a really clean attack time, you want to get rid of that thump or click. Usually don't use this unless you hear that as a problem. And then you like think, okay, I got some kind of thump or click. Let me take off the DC offset and go to DC reset and see if that gets rid of it. That's basically all that is. Otherwise, it works just like analog. Then the next one here, we're going to go to VCF reset. And this is not related to the oscillators. This is related to the VCF and the envelope. So just for ease of use, let's go to like an analog envelope. And there's a way that analog envelopes work with the filter versus like a digital envelope, like in a modern digital VST, like, you know, Spire or Silent or something. And basically in an old analog synth, it works like this. So let's just turn this down a little bit. Turn the envelope 2 up. Let me just go here and put a little bit of release time on here. This is kind of the easiest one to look at, I think. Okay, with VCF reset, basically when you have a standard analog synthesizer and you're playing polyphonic mode, you kind of have like one envelope for the filter applying across like all the voices. So like it's easiest to hear when you put on some attack and some release. Okay, and we'll go to analog. It's like let me put on some more release real quick. It's like, it's gonna wait, even though it goes to the next voice, it's like this goes up on the attack and then it starts going down with the release. But like as it's going down, if you hit the next note and it goes to the next voice, like it's gonna still use this envelope. So you're only like right here as it's going down, oop, and you're gonna hit the note and it's gonna jump from wherever it was back up to there rather than all the way at the bottom. You see how if you press a key fast, it doesn't quite start at like one identical point at the bottom. It's like kind of starts where this is still trailing off. And let's go to VCF reset. Every key starts at exactly an identical place right here. So that's basically what that does. So it's like, it's kind of a specific thing. And this is again something that like if you're having a problem with analog, then you go to VCF reset because you want to, you don't want to have like you're playing pads or some kind of long sound and you want to really restart fresh every time you hit notes and you don't like how it's kind of picking up where the last ones were leaving off and not giving you like a fresh notes hit when you hit those pads. Then you go to VCF reset, and then every time that you hit those notes, it's going to hit it straight identically from the bottom again. That's basically why that's there. Now let's go here and go to the last one is Osc reset. Osc reset emulates like a very digital oscillator. And it also, one other thing that it really emulates and does a good job at emulating is sampled sounds. Like many times, one of the things that is kind of famous in like old school production is when you're making a bass line, for example, it's a little bit hard to emulate the specifics when you're like playing around with it without taking a bunch of time. But like, let me see what I could do real quick. Like you're playing a 2 oscillator bass line with a little bit of detuning, for example. Let me go back to just one voice, monophonic especially. It's a little easier to hear. Even with one voice, every time you press a key, it's like a little bit different. It's like, like it just a little bit different and moves slightly differently each time. So what was common as an old technique, like they would take a bass line and they would find like the one, and again, this is a little bit hard to like emulate on the dot for you without taking a bunch of time. Let me try to see if I bring in a sub Osc if it's a little clearer. That sounds fine, but sometimes you get these phasey sounds where it's like the start point is not exact and they want like this rolling bass line and it's just supposed to be like da 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 da, and instead it ends up sounding like dup up up dup up up up, like it has this kind of alternating sound. So they would take one note and put it in a sampler and then just hit the note on the sampler, and every single time it would just be like da 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 every time. And this kind of emulates that, especially if you just start using one voice and without, running different voices and reset phases and so forth. It's good for like mono, but also there's other sounds that it's good for, but that's one of the functions. With Osc reset, you get like that beginning, that transient, it's stable. It sounds like you're playing back a sampled note. It's like exactly the same every time. Versus with analog, like just a little bit different every time. So when you want like a really fast rolling bass line, it's cool. You put on Osc reset, you set up your filters properly and you get like a stable sound however you want to set it up. So that's where these come in too, is like there's a phase, and basically like when you go to Osc reset, You have to really look it up for yourself a little bit because it would get too technical of an explanation. But the oscillators, like you see a sawtooth and a sawtooth, imagine they were offset against each other. Like, so when the two lined up, that transient, that initial peak, didn't hit at the exact same time. And that's where, and if it's a little different each time because the frequencies are different, that's where you get that alteration. Like what, you get the difference. So when you set these up, like the reset phase is like taking these two sawtooths and like moving them back and forth on a chart till you line them up to get a specific sound you want. It's very subtle, okay? And it has everything to do with your transient. So basically it's like you find a setting that's like the clickiest one. See, the transient changes a little bit when you move these around. Like right there, you get a click. It's very subtle, okay? But now you like do that, and then you put on your baseline thing, whatever you're doing. See how clicky and nice that is versus you put on analog? You can hear a huge difference. Now listen to that. See, that's like you get this round kind of little bit flopping around sound. Now you put on Osc Reset, it's like you sampled a note and you just hit it on the attack exactly right. Versus analog again. So if you want like a really fast rolling bass line or a fast pluck, that Osc Reset and then tuning the phases to get the most percussive sound, depending on whatever oscillator and settings you're using, that's really where it's at. That's how you're going to get those really plucky, like bop, 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 bop kind of sounds with like an analog synthesizer like this or analog emulation. So that's Osc Reset. Bipolar noise, this is literally nothing. You just leave this on. This is just for compatibility with like older versions and presets. So forget about that. Leave it on. Stack tune. I went into the stack in my first tutorial on the main page, and I even went into stack tune. So I'm not going to go into polyphony and stack and how these whole voices interact. If you want to see that, check out my first tutorial and look at the stacks and how you can also change the volumes and panning and things like this. But I'm just going to show you referencing that, like when you're using, for example, 4 voices, and we're going to go to like all 4 of them, let's say, right? So this is where the stack tuning comes in. It doubles your whole synth. And again, if you want to know how the stack works, check out tutorial 1 because I don't want to repeat everything that I said there. But just since I'm going over this, we're going to go to stack tuning. That basically does this. This is like a unison mode, okay? Meaning like you're borrowing 4 voices instead of you can't play chords now really. You're playing monophonic because you're playing unison 4 voices and you're using all of them for 1 note, meaning you're stacking 4 unisons in 1 note. Like if you went to 6 and you went to stack 6, now you're stacking 6. Same with like 3, stack 3. That's a unison of 3 oscillators, whatever the settings are and everything. So like, see how that changes? And if we went to Osc Reset, how that sounds different. Okay, so like you can see how that kind of works. Okay, so like, so stack tuning is like a more, you can use it as a fine tuning, but it's also a bigger tuning. Like it goes up semitones. So like if you want your unison to be like thicker, you can like hold shift to make fine adjustments, and you see the number up here. Anything below 1 is like cents and above 1 is semitones. So like you spread this out like this. That means like voice 1 is going to be 0, 2 will be 53 cents sharp. This is above whatever these settings are. And 3 will be let's say for argument 74 cents sharp. You get a more spread out sound. And if we detune this even more, you get more and more spread out sound. Now, this is cool because you can make chords with your stack, with your unison that carry around the keyboard. So let's say here we go to like 3.05, which is like a detune 3. And let's say here we go to like a fifth, like a detune fifth. See, that's how you make chords with your unison stacks. This one is detuning voice 3 to 7 semitones up. You can hear up here, 3 semitones, and this is 0. So like if I move this, now this is about like an octave up. So that explains this whole entire trimmers page. Okay, everything on here. We'll just go to the scope briefly. I'm going to take off this stack. I'm going to just go to regular monophonic mode, take off the stack, unison, whatever, or play just a basic oscillator, sawtooth. And let's go to the scope. Basically, the scope is just an oscilloscope. And by moving the frequency, you kind of zoom in and out horizontally and scale vertically. That's all that is. If you right click, you can have different like modes that this looks like. It's got a little glow around it, fire, and like wind. You know, these are just little effects, but to me, they're honestly pretty useless. I think the most accurate is like fast, and you can just see everything clearly. Then you can see exactly like what the waveform looks like. Right? You can see like everything. And there's ways to use this if you know how to use oscilloscope or why. It's not really important. You just kind of do everything by ear. But if you want to see some examples of what's going on, like for example, we're going to go to this and we'll go to Dual VCO Eco, which is like the MS-20 oscillator, and watch what happens here. We're going to turn this up a little bit. Look at the shape of that sawtooth. You see that? Now watch what happens to the shape. Wait, let's zoom out. Let's zoom out. Scale. Bring it down. Okay. Frequency, bring it in. So we can see the shape. There we go. Now watch what happens to the shape. Boom. He starts like rounding out right here. What that means is like at a certain volume, about like right there, above half, it starts overdriving the filter and it starts doing that soft clipping where it's turning into a square wave. Okay, so that's like a way that you've used the oscilloscope, is you can see like, oh, there's where the oscillator overdrive starts on this oscillator into this filter, you know. So that's basically the use of that. So that's everything for the scope. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You enjoyed what I had to say and the sounds here and everything else. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment about your thoughts, any other questions you have. Check out the sound packs down below in the link. The different preset packs that I got for Diva, Obsession, Behringer K2, Soft 2, Model 82. So I'll have Tal Uno down in the link in the description. Check it out. Leave a like, subscribe. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.